All right, good. So hello to Larry, to Janet and Ida and myself. We're on this call, this Zoom, and hello to everybody who might be listening later in the recording. We're going to be talking about lesson 11 in the Wiersbe's Be Counted book. Last week was lesson 10, of course, and it covered numbers 23 through 25. It was about Balaam. We spent 2 weeks learning about Balaam and Balak and how God used them. And last week, Balaam picked up where he left off the previous lesson, lesson 9, and continued his oracles. Balak wanted him to curse Israel, but he continued to just bless Israel. And God used this pagan prophet to tell us about his message, his people, and his church. And he even used this Balaam to predict things about Jesus and even the second coming. Then, and we ended with this whole thing where Balaam finally did disobey God, and it's you extract it implicitly from the Bible because it says later that Balaam told the Midianites how to win, and it wasn't through force, it was through the corrupting the people, and that process worked. And so they corrupted the people, and it got so bad that a man came in with a prostitute into the camp of Israel, and that caused God to cause there to be a big, it was a disease was spreading, and then fortunately Phineas, who was a Levite, went and saved Israel by spearing the man and the woman who had brought that pagan sin into the holy dwelling place of God. Today, in this lesson 11, we're going to cover numbers 26, 27, 28, 29, and 36. So, but we're not going to read every single word of it. We will read the important parts. Well, in these chapters, God displays loving forgiveness. It's a good way to take a look at the big picture and see what's going on here, because you'll see that he moves past this very destructive, sinful thing that the Israelites had happened and their sin, and prepared them for the promised land through numbering the soldiers and giving inheritance laws for the conquered land, and assigning Joshua as their leader, and then guiding them on how they're to worship him in the promised land. In other words, it's a done deal. Made it sound like, okay, get ready. Let's go and be prepared for when you conquer the promised land. It reminds me of that expression, when you go after Moby Dick, bring along the tartar sauce. Assume you're going to be winning, and you're going to have some food, some meat to eat at the end, and be eating some whale meat. Anyway, that's what he was doing, giving them this confidence that yes, they are still a great, big, huge people, and they will be able to do what God intended. So let's start then with numbers 26. And thank you, Ida, for reading this. And I'll take over some parts.
Okay. Yeah. After the plague had ended, the Lord said to Moses and to Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, from the whole community of Israel, record the names of all the warriors by their families. List all the men 20 years old or older who are able to go to war. So there on the plains of Moab, beside the Jordan River, across from Jericho, Moses and Eleazar the priest issued these instructions to the leaders of Israel. List all the men of Israel 20 years old and older, just as the Lord commanded Moses. This is the record of all the descendants of Israel who came out of Egypt.
So we'll start with Reuben. These were the clans descended from the sons of Reuben, Jacob's oldest son. And then it goes through all the different clans that came out of Reuben. And it ends by saying these were the clans of Reuben. Their registered troops numbered 43,730. And then it talks a little bit more about Reuben. Now, the reason this is thrown in here is because it's kind of an interesting fact. Palu was the ancestor of Eliab, and Eliab was the father of Nemuel, Dathan, and Abiram. Those names sound familiar, Dathan and Abiram. This Dathan and Abiram are the same community leaders who conspired with Korah against Moses and Aaron, rebelled against the Lord. They had an insurrection going, a mutiny. But the earth opened up its mouth and swallowed them with Korah, and the fire devoured 250 of their followers. This served as a warning for the entire nation of Israel. However, the sons of Korah did not die that day, and so that's why they show up in this numbering. Okay. Next comes the tribe of Simeon. These are the clans descended from Simeon. It's got all of them. It doesn't say much about them. No side note or aside there. Except one thing to notice, that whereas Korah had 43,000 something, they have 22,000. Next came the tribe of Gad. These were from the sons of Gad, all of its 40,500. The tribe of Judah. Judah had two sons, and Onan, who died in the land of Canaan. These were the clans descended from Judah's surviving sons. Interesting that they named the tribes after the women. The Shelahite clan, the Perizzite clan. Remember Perez, who pretended to be a prostitute and became, and Judah eventually took her as his wife, said she was more honorable than he was. And then the Zerahite clan. But what happened to her and Onan? They were so sinful that God had destroyed them. But Judah thought that because they had both married Perez, that Perez was simply bad luck. So he would not let his next son, Shelah, marry. I mean, not Shelah, but his next son in line marry Perez. And that's why Perez tricked Judah into making him have a son with her. Okay, so then these Perizzites were not parasites because they became probably the most important clan of all of them, because their descendants included David and Jesus. So Judah, the largest of all the clans, 76,500. Tribe of Issachar, not much to say, good or bad about them. 64,000. That's nothing. That's a big tribe. Zebulun, again, it's a short but sweet, 60,500. Tribe of Manasseh. Now that's half of Joseph's clan, because his sons were Ephraim and Manasseh. Manasseh was the eldest, and he had a lot of sons, 52,000. Tribe of Ephraim, 32,500. The tribe of Benjamin, little Benjamin. Remember, they were almost wiped out. because of the sins they had. Well, that came later. At this point, they were still a big tribe, and they were 45, 600. That was going to go down, way down, when the incident in Judges, where the incident at Gibeah happened. And so now finally we have the tribe of Dan, and they had 64,400. The tribe of, I'm sorry, there's another one, tribe of Asher, and they were 53, and the tribe of Naphtali, 45. In summary, the registered troops of all Israel numbered 601, 730. Those were just men of the age where they could fight. So just think about how many total people there would be, millions. Well, with that, now here we are. Why are we doing this? We did it a few chapters back in Numbers, right? Chapter 1, in fact. Well, that old generation was gone. So God ordered a new census. And this new count was almost the same as the old one. The previous one was 603, 550. The new one is 601, 730. Demonstrates God's sustaining grace in the wilderness. He kept them big. And even though they had wandered around in this land with nothing to eat, really, it's just desert, nothing to drink, he sustained them. For they were sustained solely by that manna and the water from the rocks that God would make appear. God had some reasons to request this count. Remember, David did a count later. You probably know the story that he counted the people and God had not requested it. He did it so that he could feel proud about himself for having all these people working for him, essentially. Well, and God didn't do it for that reason, of course. He did it to prepare them for military engagement, because he said, the men of fighting age, okay, get it in your heads, you're going to be fighting very soon. Let's start preparing. And he also needed to know the relative size of each of the tribes so that he could slice the new land appropriately. So the amount each tribe got was in proportion to their size. Some tribes, like Simeon, had suffered the population drop, 22 something thousand. Last time they were big. What's going on? Well, it probably reflects judgment for sin, because they played a big role in this recent incident where God had given a plague. It probably hit mainly the Simeonites. Other tribes like Judah and Zebulun, they grew. Well, anyway, it would change the proportion in land distribution, so we needed that number. Also, the act of numbering his people showed that each life mattered. Each individual life mattered. This echoes Jesus' words that even the hairs on our heads are numbered. This record keeping showed God's intimate involvement with his people. And then the census was for more than just military planning or for allocating land. It was a sacred accounting of God's covenant people. It reinforced the people's identity, their unity, and their purpose. Even in the wilderness, God was faithful to his promise to Abraham to make a great nation. This naming and counting of the tribes reminded Israel that every life mattered to God and was part of his unfolding plan. And I'm sure later, when people would read this book that Moses wrote and read this chapter, it'd be almost like you sitting in the audience and listening to all the names go by waiting for that special name. And then when your son or daughter crossed over and got the diploma, to feel so proud and so excited. So each one would probably, yay, when their tribe was named or their clan within the tribe. Simeon's small count, going back to it, it's a sober reminder that disobedience weakens not just an individual like the one who brought in that prostitute into the camp, it also weakens your entire community. In contrast, those tribes that grew reflected either greater faithfulness than the others had, or divine favor, or something else. My spiritual health impacts not just my destiny, but that of those around me. So we need to keep that in mind when we think about sinning. Next, we are going to read some more about preparing for the inheritance.
And the Lord said to Moses, divide the land among the tribes and distribute the grants of land in proportion to the tribes' populations, as indicated by the number of names on the list. Give the larger tribes more land and the smaller tribes less land, each group receiving a grant in proportion to the size of its population. But you must assign the land by lot and give land to each ancestral tribe according to the number of names on the list. Each grant of land must be assigned by lot among the larger and smaller tribal groups. This is the record of the Levites, who were counted according to their clans.
Okay, so we have the Levite clan, the Gershonites, the Kohathites, and the Merarites. Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. They're mentioned a lot in the Bible, and some of you see some of the Psalms are written by descendants of Kohath or Merari or so forth. Then we have Libnites, Hebronites, Malites, and so forth. Now, the Kohathite was the ancestor. Kohath was the ancestor of Amram, and Amram's wife was Jochebed. Now we get into an interesting story. So go ahead and
she also was a descendant of Levi, born among the Levites in the land of Egypt. Amram and Jochebed became the parents of Aaron, Moses, and their sister Miriam. To Aaron were born Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. But Nadab and Abihu died when they burned before the Lord the wrong kind of fire, different from that he had commanded. The men from the Levite clans who were 1 month old or older numbered 23,000, but the Levites were not included in the registration of the rest of the people of Israel because they were not given an allotment of land when it was divided among the Israelites. So these are the results of the registration of the people of Israel as conducted by Moses and Eleazar, the priest on the plains of Moab beside the Jordan River across from Jericho. Not one person on this list had been among those listed in the previous registration taken by Moses and Aaron in the wilderness of Sinai. For the Lord had said of them, they will all die in the wilderness. Not one of them survived except Caleb, son of
Jephunneh,
and Joshua, son of Nun.
So that last paragraph was a summary of the whole thing, kind of a big picture look. And then we have this interesting thing about the daughters of Zelophehad. I'll go ahead with this. One day, a petition was presented by the daughters of Zelophehad, Mali, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, those 5. Their father, Zelophehad, was a descendant of Hefer, the son of Gilead, son of Maker, son of Manasseh, son of Joseph. These women stood before Moses, Eleazar, the priest, and the tribal leaders, and the entire community at the entrance of the tabernacle. Our father died in the wilderness, they said. He was not among Korah's followers who rebelled against the Lord. He died because of his own sin, but he had no sons. Why should the name of our father disappear from his clan just because he had no sons? Give us property along with the rest of our relatives. So Moses brought the case before the Lord, and the Lord replied to Moses, the claim of the daughters of Zelophehad is legitimate. You must give them a grant of land along with their father's relatives. Assign them the property that would have been given to their father, and give the following instructions to the people of Israel. If a man dies and has no son, then give his inheritance to the daughters. And if he has no daughter either, transfer his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brother, give his inheritance to his father's brothers. But if his father has no brothers, give his inheritance to the nearest relative in his clan. This is a legal requirement for the people of Israel, just as the Lord commanded Moses. And then we have the chapter 36, where, okay, so God gave this to Moses. Moses told the people about it. Then the people started to implement it. And the heads of the clans of Gilead, who were these very people, the descendants of Maker, son of Manasseh, son of Joseph, came to Moses and the family leaders of Israel with a petition because it didn't quite sink into the rest of the people. They said, Sir, the Lord has instructed you to divide the land by sacred lot among the people of Israel. You were told by the Lord to give a grant of land owned by our brother Zelophehad to his daughters. But if they marry men from another tribe, okay, well, if you do that, you've got a problem, because if it's from another tribe, their grants of land will go with them to the tribe into which they marry. In this way, the total area of our tribal land is going to be reduced. So the people in that tribe who were not those daughters didn't like this, because it meant, if you look at the implications into the future, they were going to lose gradually. All the tribes are going to get mixed together, and who owns what. Then, when the year of Jubilee comes, their portion of the land will be added to that of the new tribe, causing it to be lost forever to our ancestral tribe. So Moses gave this new problem, gave the Israelites this command from the Lord. The claim of the men of the tribe of Joseph is legitimate. This is what the Lord commands concerning the daughters of Zelophehad. Let them marry anyone they like, as long as it is within their own ancestral tribe. Reminds me of what Ford said. You can have any color Ford you want as long as it's black. That back when he was mass manufacturing cars, and he didn't want to have colors because that would make things more expensive. Anyway, the daughters of Zelophehad, they can marry anybody, but it's got to be from this ancestral tribe. None of the territorial land may pass from tribe to tribe, for all the land given to each tribe must remain within the tribe to which it was first allotted. The daughters throughout the tribes of Israel who are in line to inherit property must marry within their tribe, so that all of the Israelites will keep their ancestral property, and the boundaries between all of the tribes won't keep moving around as people get married. No grant of land may pass from one tribe to another. Each tribe of Israel must keep its allotted proportion of the land. So the daughters of Zelophehad did as the Lord had commanded Moses. Mali, Tirzah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Noah all married cousins on their father's side. They married into the clan of Manasseh, son of Joseph. Thus, their inheritance of land remained within their ancestral tribe. These are the commands and regulations. So final summary here for the whole book of Numbers, because this is the last verse in the book of Numbers. These are the commands of the religious and regulations that the Lord gave to the people of Israel through Moses while they were camped in the plains of Moab beside the Jordan River across from Jericho. Okay, so even though God didn't allow him to enter the land, going back to Moses, because he's the one God's talking to. So God told him, Moses, you're not going to enter this promised land. But still, faithful Moses went ahead and kept doing his job and prepared the people to claim their inheritance, not his. God told him to distribute the land by lot according to tribal size. Later as we'll see in Numbers 34, Joshua and Eleazar the priest and the 10 tribal leaders would oversee that process. So recall, Eleazar was the next priest in line after Aaron had died in a few lessons back. Well, so if we get this counting a little bit of the Levites that I read it, they had increased slightly in number, but as we've already learned, God, of course, didn't grant them a piece of property. Instead, they were scattered through all the 48 cities that they were granted among all of the tribes. So they were spread out there. And this fulfilled Jacob's prophecy, get to that in a minute, and allowed the Levites to teach and serve throughout the land. Jacob's prophecy is near the last chapter of Genesis. It says he's talking, this is when he's on his deathbed, and all of his sons come, and he gives them a prophecy about what's going to happen in the future. And for tribe of Levi, he said, a curse on their anger, for it is fierce, a curse on their wrath, for it is cruel. I will scatter them among the descendants of Jacob. I will disperse them throughout Israel, which is exactly what's happening. They're going to all these cities throughout Israel. And the reason he claims they're so angry is because they were part of that plot. Simeon and Levi, the second and third oldest sons, who went to and had slaughtered an entire town, entire city, because one person in that town had uh, raped their sister, and so they were paying them back. Well, anyway, that was a different story, but it shows to me how God takes even those cruel things and those curses and can turn a curse into a blessing for others. Because Levites became a blessing for everybody else by serving and teaching.
Is Larry still there?
Oh, I think we lost Larry. We'll wait.
It just happened.
I'll pause the recording. Stay and wait. Yeah. I saw your eyes going.
Oh, dear.
No, not much.
Pigs.
Yeah. Hope I don't fall asleep.
It's interesting. Guess it gets stuck in or something.
It's stuffy in here. It is. Yeah. That's why it's so easy to sleep.
Yeah.
Yes. Maybe I need a dehumidifier or something.
Maybe.
Hmm?
Maybe. And it gets kind of stopped up too.
See if they're going to be able to come back in. Should put this down a little so it doesn't show that. Oh wait, that's this one here. See how much we. Hope we have time to talk about suckers. Hello.
Yeah, we're back again. I guess I lost my internet again for some reason.
Yes, I was talking about the Levites and why they were why Jacob had cursed them. Did you catch that part?
Oh,
No.
just the beginning of it.
Okay, so they are the ones who went. Oh, let me restart the shit. I paused the share the recording. Let's see, resume. All right, so sorry we lost you for a bit there, Larry and Janet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Levi, the son of Jacob, was one of the two, the other being Simeon, who went and did a very bad thing to Shechem because a fellow named Shechem had raped their sister. And so they paid back that by telling the Shechemites, deceiving them, and said, "Hey, let's just become a one big family, but first you've got to circumcise yourself." And so they all got circumcised. And the next day, while they were still in pain from that operation, they went and slaughtered everybody. And Levi was one. That's why it says a curse for their anger, for it is fierce. And so he said he was going to scatter them among the tribes of Jacob and disperse them through Israel. And that's what happened because they didn't have a tribal homeland. They were dispersed across 48 cities, and they were distributed so that there would be Levites in all of the tribes like Jacob had predicted. And it shows to me how God can take a curse and turn it into something beautiful, because those Levites then went on to be the teachers, and they served the people in their worship. And in the end, the Levites did, of course, have an inheritance, and it was the Lord himself. Now we've got these daughters of Zelophehad, and so this legal case brought by them resulted in a really remarkable change. The idea that daughters could inherit when there were no sons. God then had to later clarify that, well, but if you do inherit, you have to marry somebody within the tribe so that the tribes don't get moved around, like I said earlier. These inheritance regulations emphasized an important thing, which is that the promised land wasn't just real estate for buy and sell. It was a sacred trust on loan from God. Families were stewards, not owners. Their obedience was going to decide whether they got to enjoy that land or whether they might just lose it to invading armies. This theology of land stewardship foreshadows the New Testament ideas about spiritual inheritance. In other words, Levitical inheritance highlighted the theological fact that spiritual service requires dependence on God, just like they were dependent on God for their land. The Levites had no land, yet they were rich in their calling. You know, they had the manna from their dependence on their dependence was like manna in that they were depending on the other tribes
On here.
to are you still there, Larry?
Yes.
Oh, good. Hi, Janet. You hearing too?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. The Levites were depending on the other tribes. So it points to this principle that's a real important New Testament principle that those who preach the gospel should live by the gospel by trusting. That's what the gospel is a lot about, trusting their Lord to provide. And they were trusting, the Levites trusted the Lord to provide for them. Now we move on to dedicating a new leader. This is pretty short, and we may run on a little bit, but because of the technical difficulty, go ahead.
One day the Lord said to Moses, "Climb one of the mountains east of the river and look out over the land I have given the people of Israel. After you have seen it, you will die like your brother Aaron, for you both rebelled against my instructions in the wilderness of Sin. When the people of Israel rebelled, you failed to demonstrate my holiness to them at the waters. These are the waters of Meribah at Kadesh in the wilderness of Sin." Then Moses said to the Lord, "Oh Lord, you are the God who gives breath to all creatures. Please appoint a new man as leader for the community. Give them someone who will guide them wherever they go and will lead them into battle so that the community of the Lord will not be like sheep without a shepherd." The Lord replied, "Take Joseph, son of Nun, Joshua, son of Nun, who has a spirit in him, and lay your hands on him. Present him to Eleazar the priest before the whole community and publicly commission him to lead the people. Transfer some of your authority to him so the whole community of Israel will obey him. When direction from the Lord is needed, Joshua will stand before Eleazar the priest, who will use the Urim, one of the sacred lot casts before the Lord, to determine his will. This is how Joshua and the rest of the community of Israel will determine everything they should do." So Moses did as the Lord commanded. He presented Joshua to Eleazar the priest and the whole community. Moses laid his hands on him and commissioned him to lead the people, just as the Lord had commanded through Moses.
So Moses is 120 years old now. He wasn't going to enter the land, as we know. He at times he pleaded with God, just let me enter, but he was only able to view it from Mount Nebo, and his legacy wasn't that he led the people into the promised land, but that he was faithful. He was faithful in his leadership and humbly surrendered to God's will. That's who Moses was. Moses, then what did he ask God? It wasn't, please, one more time, can I enter the promised land? No, he asked God to appoint a new leader. So the people he led along the way would not be like sheep without a shepherd. And God chose Joshua, a man full of the Spirit, battle-tested, faithful. And he had served Moses as a lieutenant for years. And he's one who stood against peer pressure along with Caleb when all the other people were saying, no, we can't enter the promised land. It's too scary. There are giants. And he led them in battles. So Joshua's commissioning was public, and Moses laid his hands on him, and Eleazar the priest helped by using the Urim and Thummim, and this prepared the people to follow Joshua as God's appointed leader. Moses' final act of leadership wasn't a miracle or a military campaign, but a wise transfer of authority. His humility in doing that teaches us that finishing well includes preparing others to carry the mission forward. Leadership that hoards power, just cares about themselves, falters, doesn't go anywhere. Leadership that multiplies it and delegates power flourishes. That's an important management principle as well. Joshua's name means Yahweh saves. And if foreshadows Jesus or Jeshua, you might have heard that as Jesus' name. Well, that comes right from the word Joshua. It's the same. Just as Joshua led Israel into their earthly inheritance, he took them across Jordan to the promised land. Jesus leads his people into the heavenly one, which is going to be the new heaven and earth. When we eventually read the book of Joshua, we'll see that Joshua was concerned for the glory of God and for the welfare of the people, and that he was usually careful to obey the orders God gave him. He wasn't perfect, and twice he didn't seek God's will, which brought the nation into some shameful defeats. One was that the little Gibeonite group beat them, and some people died, and the other was, of course, not asking about the I forgot Joshua. Oh, the people who pretended to be from, there were the Gibeah, and then the Gibeons were the ones who acted like they were from a foreign country. And both times Joshua didn't ask God what to do before he made a decision. Yet to his credit, he trusted God to turn his mistakes into successes, which God did. So moving on, let's look at let's party, because the next two chapters, which we'll skim through, cover the worship. So we transition to the next chapter. It's like entering, whoa, that has nothing to do with what we just been talking about, but it's important because it was another way God was able to reassure his people about that they were going to have a life after the Jordan, and it was going to be a wonderful one. See, before entering the land, God reminded Israel of its spiritual obligations. And these two chapters, outline the rhythm of sacrificial worship daily, weekly, monthly, and annually. God commanded each offering not so that somebody could get a lot of money, but to keep Israel close to him and remind them of his holiness and his grace and his power. So we have the daily ones, chapter 28, verses 1 through 8. Okay, all of them are going to be animal sacrifices, but a lot of times they eat a good get to eat as well. The Lord said to Moses, "Give these instructions to the people of Israel. The offerings you present as special gifts are pleasing aroma to me, and they are my food. See to it that they are brought at the appointed times and are offered according to the instructions. Say to the people, this is a special gift you must present to the Lord as your daily burnt offering. 2 one-year-old male lambs with no defects, one in the morning, the other at night. And you have to have a grain offering, and you have to have olive oil, you have to have wine, liquid offering, and then in the evening do the same thing. So this is the daily, and that's the morning and evening. That's so that it became part of their routine, that even if they didn't participate in this camp, they could smell it and they could see the smoke coming up from the altar and know, okay. And then that would remind them of God. The next was every week on the Sabbath. The next few verses. I think we're frozen here. We'll try again. There. on the Sabbath, sacrifice. Okay, now this time it's two 1-year-old male lambs, no defects, and then a grain offering, the flour and olive oil, and the liquid offering. So that's like another one with on top of what you'd normally offer during the week. So that would be the Sabbath. Additional reinforce this idea that the Sabbath was for rest and that it was special. And then there was a monthly thing, which was a new moon that sacrificed, that celebrated renewal. And those are the next few verses, 11 through 15, and pretty much says, sacrifice some animals and then have your meal. Should weren't so slow here. There. So it involved more animal sacrifice. And then we have the annual festivals once a year, Passover and unleavened bread. Of course, that's to remind them of what just happened in their event. And it marked Israel's deliverance and separation from sin. Recall, it talks about unleavened bread. Recall that yeast is a picture of sin. So, of course, this Passover reminds them of their deliverance from Egypt, but it also reminds them about how they are to separate from sin. Why? Because it's also called the festival of unleavened bread sometimes, the Passover. And that's about yeast and how it's a picture of sin and how they had to get all the yeast out of their house for a week beforehand before they could leave, and how this redeemed people had to be holy. And then 50 days after that was the end of the harvest, and that was Pentecost, and it pointed to the Spirit's coming, as in Acts 2, where on that Pentecost, those tongues of fire came down and affected all the people. And then we have the Feast of Trumpets. That one is the beginning of a 2-week series of celebrations that happened in the fall, and it marked the beginning of a new year. Celebrate the Festival of Trumpets each year on the first day of the appointed month in early autumn. You must call an official day for holy assembly, and you may not do any work. On that day, you must present a burnt offering as a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And it tells them all about the offering and all the things that come with it. These special sacrifices are in addition, and these offerings are given as a special gift to the Lord. So that was the day of the Feast of Trumpets, followed just after by the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement. Well, 10 days later, on the 10th day of the same month, you must call another holy assembly. On that day, the Day of Atonement, the people must go without food and must not do any ordinary work. So fast. You must present a burnt offering, and it tells what it's composed of. And also sacrifice a goat and all of that. Well, now that was the most solemn day and is still the most solemn day in the Jewish calendar. It's a day of national repentance, and it foreshadows Christ's atonement. It was the only day of the year when God allowed the high priest to go beyond the veil of the Holy of Holies, and he had to do it just the right way with the right kind of incense and with the sacrificial blood. And then right after that was the Feast of Tabernacles. Five days later, on the 15th day of the same month, you must call another holy assembly of all the people, and you may do no ordinary work on that day. It is the beginning of the Festival of Shelters. It's also known as the a sukkah, a 7-day festival to the Lord. Tells what you do each day of the festival. You do something special. You do the burnt offerings, and each day these offerings are accompanied. And you must also, second day you do another offering like the first, and the third day, each day, the fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, seventh day. On the eighth day of the festival, proclaim another holy day. You must do no ordinary work on that day. You must present a burnt offering, pleasing. So it's focusing on the offerings that you bring. You must, and then here we have in kind of a summary. You must present these offerings. It's talking about all of them I just mentioned, all of the ones in the calendar, to the Lord at your annual festivals. These are in addition to the sacrifices and offerings you present in connection with vows or voluntary offerings. It's in addition to the burnt offerings of each day, the grain offerings, liquid or peace offerings. So this festival of Feast of Tabernacles was a joyful reminder of God's provision during the wilderness journey. It's temporary shelters reminded Israel that life itself is a pilgrimage. It points to our eternal home, in fact. And you see here, this is what they still do today. The Jews, happens to be on the West Bank, and you can see a lot of the people build these booths for that week. And I'm guessing right after the Day of Atonement, you got 5 days, that very solemn day, you got 5 days, and they spend a lot of that time building their booths and constructing them. And you see, they somehow managed to even put them on the 3rd floor of this apartment complex. Really, really fascinating. And they live in those booths and they eat in them. And so there's a really not great movie called Ushpizin, which means visitor, and it's supposedly good luck if a stranger or a visit, you get a stranger or a visitor during your time. It emphasizes the booths and the good luck of the visitor that you take in for that week, emphasize how we're all just pilgrims on this earth. And this is a really not our property, it's God's. So then let's look at some applications of all of these very quickly, all of these verses. This whole history that we're going through has application for us today, because it tells us that God restores the repentant and recommissions the willing. So no matter what my sin is, no matter how far down I've gone, it's never too late. God is always ready to hear our repentance, for us to repent and recommission us to go out and fight another day for him. Another thing that's clear is that God values order, faithfulness, and heritage. Order is necessary so that we don't have chaos in our churches or in our communities. Faithfulness, that's what faith is. For God so loved the world that whosoever believes in him, has faith in him, will not perish but have eternal life. And then our heritage, where we came from, is so important, especially for the Jews, but for us too, because that's part of our heritage. And then a third point is that true worship isn't something you do once a year at Easter, or maybe twice a year at Easter and Christmas. It's regular, it's structured, and sometimes that requires sacrifice to make that happen. We're here today because we have regular worship. We read the Bible every day. It becomes part of the rhythm of our lives. And neurologists and those who study the mind tell us that how these rhythms actually affect the way our brains are wired up, so that I think it draws us more, makes us more and more godlike. We're like more and more holy, we'll say. I don't think we'll ever be God, but we'll be closer to what God wants us to be, what he designed us to be. If God's people under the law could strive to obey God, they just had the law. They didn't have what we've got. But how much more should we who have experienced grace want to do? For believers today, Jesus is our final sacrifice. We're not still out there burning those animals up. He's our final sacrifice and eternal high priest. He goes in there every time we need him, not just once a year. He makes us priests too, who can do that and talk directly to God. And we're called to offer spiritual sacrifices, not burnt ones. And what are they? Ourselves, our praise, our good works, and our gifts, our generous gifts. Let's worship God wholeheartedly. Let's be like David when he said, I will not offer that which cost me nothing. That's when he wanted to make an offering to God on that threshing floor, and the owner of the threshing floor said, "Oh no, I'll let you have this." He wanted to buy that threshing floor, and he said, "No, I'm not going to offer something which cost me nothing." Worship and mission thrive when rooted in rhythm and purpose and preparation. That's a message Wiersbe gives us from this. God's order is not burdensome, though. It's life-giving. Because if you're not having this rhythm and purpose and preparation, you're so exposed to the devil and his temptations, so much more. It's a gift that God wants us to do that. In summary, since we're late here, in Numbers 26 through 29 and 36 there, God led Israel from judgment to readiness. He raised a new army. He defined tribal inheritance. He appointed spiritual leaders. He renewed the nation's worship. These were not simply tasks of administration. They were acts of grace, because God was preparing his people for that promised land. Not because they were worthy of it, they just proved they weren't, but because he's faithful to his promises. Promise way back, the covenant with Abraham, often renewed. The same God who brought Israel to the edge of the promised land there, right on the cusp, is at work in our lives, guiding us, restoring us, and inviting us to be more holy by worshiping him and obeying him. So then next week, we'll go to lesson 12, and we're going to discuss numbers 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35. And we'll learn of the sanctity of words, the victory of faith, the loyalty of the people to one another, sovereignty of God, and the certainty of inheritance. So we're going to take away a lot more theological principles from these 6 chapters next week. And that's all I have. It's time to stop the sharing and maybe quickly close. Janet or Larry, you have anything for us today?
No, nothing today to add to it, Ralph.
Okay.
thinking of anything right off.
Okay. Well, since we are late, I'll go ahead and stop the recording. We'll have prayer.